Where I was employed in my late 20s, I found my coworkers gradually distancing themselves from me. I began to notice they would gather without me and seldom came into my office as what used to be a common, enjoyable occurrence, whether for business or personal reasons. I thought to myself, I don't have BO or poor oral health, but it kind of hurt. What I eventually realized is that my frequent freaking cussing rants caused my coworkers to avoid me. Have you ever borrowed a pencil, written something down, and then absent-mindedly walked off with it? No big deal, except back in those days, it would be the equivalent of someone borrowing my laptop to send a note and then absent-mindedly walking off with it. Those pencils were my work tools, and I couldn't function without them. Hence, the apparent anger management issue that haunted me. It actually had control of me because I didn't have control of it. Now, there are lots of examples of anger issues in the Bible. Sarah wrongly used her anger against Hagar. Haman was angry with Mordecai. Jonah was angry at God because he spared Nineveh. God was angry at Uzzah, and all he did was reach out his hand and steady the Ark of the Covenant that was beginning to tip as it was carried. So God struck him dead. Then King David was angry because the Lord's anger had burst out against Uzzah. There are a lot of anger issues in the Old Testament, but let's not leave Jesus out. He was angered toward the money changers in the temple, turned over tables and ran them all out. I think my anger back in the day came across more like Jesus' anger, but not for the same valid reasons. The cynical side of me would reason that anger issues are hereditary or genetic because Jesus was God's son and they both exhibited anger. The serious, honest part of me reasons that unhealthy anger is far more learned behavior and easily becomes a bad habit due to our basic human nature to perpetually fall short of the best that God has for us. And that's where I go with all of this. Jesus said he came to give life and give it more abundantly, even here on earth in our lives here. As I was struggling with my out-of-control anger, my wife Mana, who worked in the same office, told me that in her entire life she had never heard her dad curse or say a foul word. Knowing the man, I knew it was true. I decided that's what I wanted for our kids to say about me. You see, we were expecting our first child, and I had a few months to get my act together, and it seemed easy enough. Needless to say, over the years, all 5 of our kids fell one at a time to my untempered verbal outbursts. I think that sounds better than frequent freaking cussing rants, don't you? But isn't that what we do? We try to shade or color the reality of our sin so it doesn't look or sound as bad. We had a neighbor down the street from us in the 80s whose barn had become a breeding ground for rats. They were all over our backyards, terrorizing our dogs and eating their food. The barn owners felt bad and diligently painted it a beautiful barn red with that classic white trim. It looked great, but it still had rats because nothing was done on the inside. I needed something done on the inside of me. I didn't want my kids growing up staying clear of me because of my temper. I had to own the desire to change, the discipline to change, humble myself before God and learn to depend on His strength to overcome this destructive habit. In addition, I had to learn to ask for forgiveness when I faltered. I learned some important lessons in the process and a lot about myself. With the encouragement and patience of both God and Mana, I'm not the same man I was back then, and so glad I'm not. My dad, his dad, my 4 brothers and I have all had the anger management issues to deal with. My oldest brother Steve would say, if the Botsford men keep marrying good women, it just might get bred out of us. With, of course, the caveat that our offspring are raised with the awe and devotion toward God. There's enough evidence in the 4th generation of our family since my grandfather to say that my brother was correct. our growing fifth generation will have it a lot better. My brothers and I still remain responsible for controlling our own anger, but that tendency hasn't gone away in any of us. But by all indications from our wives, we're all making, as what they would call it, appropriate gains. Each of us are still a work in progress in the work that God brings to us through His grace and mercy.